I'm very excited about making this video. It's probably my favorite type of coin within my favorite niche of ancient coin collecting. Today, let's assemble a coin set of the 5 good emperors, the Golden Age of Rome. Now, that's a very popular set with Roman coin collectors for a series of reasons. First, it's a subset that fits within the most popular type of set people go for, which is the 1 coin per emperor set. So most Roman imperial collectors will inevitably make this set as part of their larger goal. There's also the added benefit that the coins of this period are very abundant. It might not be the absolutely cheapest set out there, but it's pretty affordable if compared to other sets, especially considering the typical quality of these coins. If you are not extremely picky about pieces in exquisite condition, style, or some special type of reverse, we're talking about roughly 100 euros at the time I'm publishing this video for a very decent example of a silver denarius for each of these emperors. Maybe a bit more, 200 for one of them. So it's actually a pretty good set in regards to getting good value for money. You can, of course, go for the base metal denominations, or if you can afford it, their gold ori. But since this video is more catered towards beginners, I think the denarius is a perfect coin to get started. You don't need to worry about some specificities of bronze coins like bronze disease or tooled coins. And as for gold, well, that's a very significant investment, so let's go with silver for today. The art in these coins is, for the most part, really good. The quality of the portraits varies quite a bit, but they are at least quite decent. And some are just straight up pieces of art. And of course, these 5 emperors are very popular, so the amount of material available on their history and on this period as far as its coinage goes is nearly endless. The 2nd century AD was the Golden Age of Rome. Most things were going surprisingly well. Their armies were strong and kept the borders safe. The political environment was surprisingly stable. And the people who lived within the borders of the empire enjoyed a reasonable level of economic prosperity and quality of life. Of course, taking into consideration we're talking about the ancient period. Life was harsh, wealth was scarce, many things could lead you to an early grave, but considering the atrocious living conditions everyone around the world was living at that time, we could say the Romans at least had it less bad compared to many of their contemporaries. In case you don't know who these 5 men were, maybe a small introduction is necessary. The 5 good emperors of Rome, Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus, Pius, and Marcus Aurelius, these men ruled over what is often regarded as the Golden Age of the Roman Empire, a period spanning from 96 to 180 AD. It was marked by mostly peace, prosperity, and for the most part, level-headed, mentally stable, and fairly competent rulers. We might know mostly Marcus Aurelius as the philosopher emperor, but in reality, all of these men adhered to this idea of the emperor as this philosopher monarch, this idea of an emperor capable of picking up arms to defend Rome, if necessary, but first and foremost, this civilized, intelligent ruler, mostly focused on the efficient handling of the empire's economy. Unlike many of their predecessors, these emperors were not succeeded by their biological sons, but instead they were chosen through adoption, a deliberate system of merit-based succession. I mean, until Marcus Aurelius decided to change it. Oh, Marcus, I had so much faith in you. And of course, it required that you were well-connected, that you were part of the Roman aristocracy. Under their rule, the empire reached its greatest territorial extent. Infrastructure flourished, legal reforms were enacted, the arts and culture in general thrived. This flourishing of arts can easily be seen on coins. Some people might argue, with some reason, that coins of the 1st century were of nicer, more realistic style. However, the sheer number of coins made in the 2nd century, which apparently was much, much higher, and the consistent quality in these coins shows that it wasn't just that Rome had talented engravers, but it had dozens, maybe hundreds of talented engravers working at once. They could afford to employ lots of people. This is a major sign of economic prosperity. Rome's golden age isn't illustrated on a few thousand wonderful coins, but on hundreds of millions of great-looking coins. So how about we look at our coin set? Now, picking just 5 coins from this period, even if we restrict ourselves exclusively to silver coins, actually requires a lot of self-restraint because there are so many coins from the 2nd century. It's not just about these 5 emperors. Coins were a way to show the imperial family as a whole. So you have empresses, Caesars, some of who never became emperors, others that eventually became emperors. For example, Marcus Aurelius, he has lots of coins issued for him while he was still growing up. There are also posthumous issues after an emperor passed away. We're really just skimming the surface with this video. And it's not just a matter of collecting other characters, other faces on coins. Collecting more coins apart from a basic set of 5 coins, 1 per emperor, gives a lot more depth to your collection. As an example, having a coin of Antoninus Pius is great, but it's even nicer to have one of his coins and a coin of his beloved Faustina, especially the issues made after her untimely death. It's a very touching show of admiration of the emperor towards his late wife. Or maybe Faustina II, the wife of Marcus Aurelius. She was the mother of Commodus after all. When you just listen to the stories of Commodus and how he started showing problematic tendencies when he was young, that's one thing. But to actually have a coin of his mother and of his father, it gives a whole lot more depth to the connection to history we all love in our coins. She was also the daughter of the previous emperor Antoninus Pius and Faustina I, so a coin of hers serves as an extra on the set and as a wonderful bridge, a link between both emperors. There's also a temporal aspect to it. This was a time of long-reigning emperors. These men aged and the portraits on their coins changed considerably. Having multiple coins of the same emperor struck at different parts of their reign makes your collection richer, leads to a more complex experience. As yet another example, the earliest coins of Hadrian, for example, show a surprisingly young portrait of him. Some could even say he looks a bit boyish there. But as we get to his later issues, we see that Hadrian is clearly older. He has gained some pounds, he's a little bit chubbier, and it connects to history. When he was young, he often accompanied the army on campaign, he went on hunts, he did a lot of exercising. Not so much later in life, and it shows on coins as he becomes more sedentary and he gains weight. But hey, since I don't want this set to end up having 50 coins, and I have the tendency of getting carried away when talking about 2nd century Rome, let's focus on 1 coin for each of the 5 emperors. Very straightforward. I've picked 5 pieces that I think represent sort of like the peculiarities of their reigns. Coins that sum up very briefly what each man looked like and how they prefer to rule. So let's get started. And this week's episode is kindly sponsored by L5, the new online marketplace for ancient coins. L5 is a platform that focuses on trust, transparency, and low fees. It is an environment where you can safely buy coins to add to your collection, knowing every item listed has been vetted by specialists, with a lifetime guarantee of authenticity, and the new system of online bidding that ensures fair, transparent bidding. No sniping, no shield bids, just a fair trading environment for buyers and sellers. L5's proposal is to eliminate all uncertainties beginners and experienced collectors alike might have when buying a coin, while offering a low-cost service with no listing fees and a buyer's premium of just 5%. Make sure to check out L5.com for what I believe is a new platform that the ancient coin market was in need for. So let's begin with the first of our 5 good emperors, the old and venerable Nerva, who became emperor at the ripe old age of 66. Nerva reigned for just over a year before dying, 16 months to be exact. Many people question if he should even be in this list, alongside legendary figures like Trajan or Marcus Aurelius. I think Nerva deserves the spot. It's not because of him and his rule necessarily. Let's give Nerva the credit he's due, because without him, the so-called five good emperors might never have existed as a group at all. When he came to power in 96 AD, Rome had just gone through the reign of Domitian, who ruled with fear and paranoia, particularly in the later stages of his reign. Nerva wasn't a military man, nor he had any idea of the emperor as a monarch like Domitian. He was an older senator, chosen more for stability than strength. And yet, in just under 2 years on the throne, he managed to steer the empire away from tyranny and towards one of the most successful periods it ever lived through. What really makes Nerva stand out is one brilliant decision. He adopted Trajan. That move, handing power to someone based on merit, not blood, and coming to a balanced point between the influence of the senatorial class, the managerial class, and the more executive, power-based force of the army, this set the tone for the next century. He didn't let ego get in the way. He saw that Rome at this time would find a better balance if this consensus between army and aristocracy existed, and he made it happen. So even though his reign was short and he's often at the least talked about of the five, Nerva was the one who sort of like started it all. And without him, there might not have been a Trajan, a Hadrian, and this concept of an enlightened monarchy transmitted through an elective succession might have not taken place. Having such a short reign, sadly there isn't a huge variety of designs available for Nerva, and his coins tend to be more expensive than those of the other five good emperors. But they aren't that much more expensive. By the time I'm making this video, starting at 200 euros, that should be more than enough to get a pretty decent one, and with a bit of patience, you may find it for less. One thing that you will always get, however, regardless of budget you decide to go for, is this wonderful, gigantic nose we have here. Nerva was really up to the stereotype of the Roman nose. His portraits are all quite realistic, to a point of being unflattering. Most emperors made like a certain effort to show a curated image on their coins, especially as they started growing older. Most emperors stop aging on coins as they reach like their mid-50s, but Nerva wanted to be seen as he was, which is quite unique. The legends spell out his regnal name and the myriad of titles that were bestowed upon him in such a short time being emperor. It reads, Imperator, Nerva Caesar Augustus, Pontifex Maximus, Tribunicia Potestate Iterum, Iterum meaning for the second year, Consul Tertium, Consul for the third year, and finally Pater Patriae, Father of the Nation. And the reverse is quite fitting for a man like him. We have Salus Publica. Salus was the goddess of good health, of cure, but mostly she was associated with the idea of well-being, of being in a state of equilibrium, not necessarily related to bodily health, although this was often the most common meaning given to her. If this reverse was simply Salus, we could interpret it as a desire of well-being for the health of the emperor. This was a common motif on coins throughout the imperial period. However, in this case, with the second word, publica, Salus publica, making reference to the public, to the people in particular, I think this was a genuine desire on Nerva's part to do good, to reestablish trust amongst the people that political stability was ensured, that no horrible civil war was in the horizon. This theory is probably reinforced by the abundance of other reverse types of Nerva, showing clasped hands, an obvious symbol of good faith. Notice Salus here is holding a bundle of wheat stalks. Civil war and any kind of unrest meant more than bloodshed. It meant a disruption to Rome's complex logistics systems. Rome had, of course, 1 million people at that time, so famine was always like a few disruptions of public order away. So this was a really important symbol. People were constantly concerned about famine and the supply of food, rich and poor people alike. So here, Nerva is reinforcing everyone like, okay, everyone can relax, order is restored. From Nerva, we go to the legendary Trajan, often held up as the gold standard of Roman emperors, and for good reason. When he became emperor in 98 AD, he combined military brilliance, he was a fantastic general, with genuine concern for the welfare of his people, something you don't always get in the men of the military. They might be very practical, but more often than not, there was a lack of consideration of civil matters. Trajan is best known for two very successful expansion campaigns, the conquest of Dacia and the invasion of the Parthian Empire. Both brought in huge amounts of wealth and booty, and they expanded Rome's frontiers to the largest extension they would ever reach. But Trajan wasn't just a conqueror, he was also a builder. He poured a lot of that new wealth into massive public works, roads, bridges, aqueducts, markets. After all, you can't have antiquity's most powerful army without an economy and the logistics network that could sustain that. Trajan had that vision. He also displayed a surprising interest in political welfare, launching programs to help orphans and the poor, working closely with the Senate to maintain stability. You get my idea. His reign was really spectacular for anyone's consideration, to a point that later generations of emperors were measured against him, literally. When new emperors were raised to the position of emperor, they were praised with a phrase, Felicitor Augusto melior Traiano, meaning, may you be luckier than Augustus and more competent than Trajan. So to illustrate his coinage, I've picked an example from later in his reign, a denarius issued between 114 and 116 during his war against the Parthians, and it shows in the coin. Trajan is shown wearing the paludamentum, the cloak which covered the armor while he was on campaign. So this coin shows Trajan sort of like on the march, so to speak. And we will see this message reinforced on the reverse in just a moment. One particular perk of Trajan's coins are the comically long legends. We don't know if Trajan had a bit of an inflated ego, and if he had, well, he deserved it. After all, he was such a good emperor. But the point is, all of his coins spell out the entirety of his regnal titles. It can be exhausting to read his coins. In this case, it reads, Imperator Caesar, Nerva Traiano, Optimo Augusto, Germanicus Dacicus. That's a mouthful. The very last of his issues were even longer, with the added Particus at the end of the legends. I tend to prefer these later issues, not only for the super long legends, which I find quite fun, but also for the quality of the portraits. His earlier issues don't have like highly realistic portraits, kind of like Nerva. It has like sort of like exaggerated features. However, later coins like this one show him exactly how he was, indistinguishable from the many marble portraits of him that survived to our days. So if you just need one coin of Trajan, get a late example, even if it might be a little bit more expensive. On the reverse, for such a successful soldier emperor, we couldn't have anyone else but Mars, the god of war. Mars is completely naked, holding on one hand his spear, and on another a military trophy, a trophy made out of the captured armor and weapons of his enemies. And he's boldly advancing to the right. It's quite common to see depictions of naked gods, and even naked emperors. The idea behind it was to set them apart. There was the obvious initial impact of seeing someone so vulnerable, naked, but that's the idea. You were looking at a hero, someone who had nothing to hide, someone who had achieved moral and physical excellence, you might even call perfection, and didn't have to cover his flaws to anyone because, well, they had none. That's why nude images like this are often called heroic nudes. Apart from Mars, we have on the legends a continuation of his titles. It reads Pontifex Maximus, Tribunicia Potestate, Consul Sextum, consul for the sixth time. Now that's a lot of consulships, even for an emperor. And finally, pater patriae senatus populusque Romanus, the father of the nation, of the Senate and the people of Rome. Now we go to Hadrian. Hadrian is another very interesting character. Unlike his predecessor, who focused on expansion, military conquest, and the suppression of Rome's most dangerous neighbors, Hadrian took a step back and focused on consolidating the empire. He pulled back from the overextended frontiers left by Trajan. Actually, his abandonment of Mesopotamia right after Trajan conquered it earned him lots of criticism in his early reign, but that was all part of his main plan, which was strengthening the borders. That's where, for example, Hadrian's Wall in Britain comes in. It wasn't just a defensive structure, it was a statement. Rome had enough of a growth, and it was time to hold the valuable territory that they had. This strategy ended up being successful. The borders stipulated by Hadrian lasted for centuries. He was also a massive lover of Greek culture. He traveled more than probably any other emperor, visiting every corner of the empire, and everywhere he went, he prompted learning, art, architecture, especially in the Greek East. We see this fostering of arts manifest on coins as well. I think the coinage of Hadrian is the best looking of all of the 5 good emperors, and stylistically, his portraits remind me a lot of the busts we find on Hellenistic coins. He saw himself as this Greek-like philosopher king proposed in the works of Plato, this blend of Roman authority and military effectiveness with the Greek intellect and wise rule. To an extent, he achieved this kind of rule, but if we dig deeper into his personality, we will find this emotionally unstable man. He had fits of rage. He was known to be a micromanager, and despite most contemporaries approving of his skills and as an administrator, he was very hard to work with. Under his reign, cities flourished, public buildings were funded, and the empire felt more connected. Hadrian basically made Rome stronger, not by conquering more land, but by building up what it already had. And in doing so, he gave the empire a solid foundation. And this trend of internal strengthening was continued by his successors. And this would give Rome a level of stability and resilience that they would really need in the following centuries. To illustrate the coinage of Hadrian, I picked this absolute gem of a denarius. This is one of my favorite pieces in my entire collection. The flan is gigantic. Every component of the design fits nicely on it with space to spare. And we have this very imposing portrait of Hadrian with a good level of relief and great style. That's one of the things I think sets his portraits apart from the other 4. While the others have good and bad busts with better or worse portraits, Hadrian consistently puts out coins with wonderful style. When this particular piece was made, Hadrian was already in his 50s. Here we can clearly see that phenomena of emperors not aging beyond their late 40s, early 50s, to avoid showing the image of the emperor losing his vigor to rule due to advanced age. He looks fresh, he looks strong. That kind of, let's say, imperial Photoshop is particularly true for Hadrian. He was very self-aware of his facial flaws, to a point that some claim that his facial hair wasn't an attempt to emulate the philosopher kings of Greece he liked so much, but rather to hide facial features like acne or some sort of disfigurement that he had. The legends on Hadrian's coins are also substantially shorter than those of Trajan, which helps give out this cleaner look and draws a bit of focus towards the bust of the emperor. Here we can read Hadrianus Augustus Pater Patriae, quite straight to the point. On the reverse, we have a seated image of Pudicitia. Having a coin featuring her, the Roman virtue of modesty, chastity, and feminine virtue is actually a bit ironic for Hadrian, given the complicated nature of his personal life. While Pudicitia was traditionally associated with ideal Roman womanhood, Hadrian had a famously distant relationship with his wife, Sabina, coupled with his openly passionate attachment to the young Greek Antoninus, his favorite. So this adds a layer of contradiction to this coin. It's almost as if the coin proclaims a public ideal that his private life completely subverted. In that sense, the image of Pudicitia under Hadrian's name feels more like imperial propaganda than a reflection of his personal values. However, I kinda like it. The many records of Hadrian's more fiery nature and of him being difficult to deal with gives a certain humanity to him out of all of these 5 legendary men. It reminds us that they were people just like us, with passions, maybe traumas, personality flaws. The simple fact that they were some of the world's most powerful men did not mean they were immune to being human and having flaws. After Hadrian, we go to Antoninus Pius, probably the most underrated of the 5 good emperors, and my personal favorite. His reign was one of the most peaceful and stable times in Roman history, and that's saying something. He ruled from 138 to 161 AD, and what really sets him apart is that he managed to govern the empire without ever leading a major military campaign. No big wars, no flashy conquests, apart from maybe a small event of unrest in Egypt and some tensions with the Parthians that were solved diplomatically. It was largely just steady, competent rule for 23 wonderful years. Instead of expanding borders, Antoninus focused on keeping things running smoothly, improving infrastructure, maintaining justice, and making sure the provinces were well managed. He was deeply respected for his calm, consistent leadership and his commitment to Roman tradition and to necessary legal reforms. And here's the thing, peace under Antoninus wasn't just about avoiding conflict. It allowed the empire to flourish, to breathe economically and culturally. Cities grew, trade boomed, and people had the chance to live their lives without constant upheaval. In a time where so many emperors are remembered for battles and bloodshed, Antoninus shows that sometimes the best thing a ruler can do is to keep things peaceful and let its people live their lives. So, there's this Chinese saying, it's actually a curse that illustrates this very well. It's an indirect way of wishing ill to someone, and it goes like, I hope you live through interesting times. Well, interesting times for historians are times of war, plague, unrest, stuff that makes it to the history books, and all of the things someone living through antiquity did not wish. So by saying Antoninus' reign was uneventful is actually very high praise. And since his reign was so benign, I picked a coin issued right at the middle of that calm period, a coin that celebrates his 10th year as emperor. Let's look at the obverse first. Nothing out of the ordinary. The bust of a serene, middle-aged man, calmly looking to the horizon, wearing his laurel crown, and even the coins of Antoninus look calm and relaxed. Very few of them, for example, show him wearing the paludamentum, the cloak worn on campaign, which generally covered his battle cuirass and was normally chosen to be displayed in times of some sort of conflict or to reinforce the militaristic side of the emperor. And however, on most of Antoninus' coins, we just see his head. The legends read, Antoninus Augustus Pius, Pater Patriae, Tribunicia Potestate for the 11th year. Once more, very peaceful legends. It's missing a critical title used by most emperors, which was Imperator. This was the title given to the supreme leader of the armed forces. So to have imperium was to have the control of troops, the right to rule, and to dispense decisions of life and death. Antoninus didn't need that. Very few of his coins show the name Imperator. And on the reverse, as I said, we have the commemorative design. There's this lovely laurel crown around the design, right next to the outer border of the flan. And the laurel crown was obviously the symbol of imperial glory, the ultimate sign of one's rule. And at the center, the legends read, Primi decenales, consul quartum. The decinalia was the commemoration of 10 years of rule, and by stating the primi first, it implied that there would be a second one, which there was. Antoninus celebrated 2 decenaliae. Then we have the consul quartum at the border, showing he held the position of consul for the 4th year. What a wonderful coin, issued right at the middle of that golden age. And finally we get to Marcus Aurelius. Marcus is often seen as the philosopher emperor, and his reign marks the final chapter of the 5 good emperors. He is remembered not just for ruling very well, especially given the turbulent times he had to face, but also for thinking deeply about what it meant to rule. His Meditations, a collection of personal reflections written in the middle of war, revealed this introspective man, constantly pondering on how to stay virtuous, rational, and grounded, even as the empire faced serious challenges. Unlike the mostly peaceful reign of his predecessors, Marcus spent much of his time dealing with crises, renewed hostilities among the Germanic, Danube, and Parthian frontiers, a horrible plague. His reign was tough. Yet, despite the chaos, he remained steady and principled, doing what he believed was right to the empire, even if it was against his natural tendencies. Because you see, Marcus was a deeply introspective man. He would have been all too happy to keep it to his philosophy and his studies, yet he displayed a remarkable energy with the daily tasks of a public figure like the emperor. Even during the 23 years he had as a Caesar under the previous emperor, he knew he was going to be emperor one day, so he always got up and did what was asked of him. And when war came, there he was, ready to face the harshness of army life. From contemporary witnesses, he also seemed to have been surprisingly humble and serene. He wasn't one to complain or to have any fits of rage. If there's one flaw people point to, however, it's his incomprehensible decision to make his son Commodus his successor. The boy definitely displayed problematic tendencies since he was very young, and this move led to the end of this golden age and ushered the period of decline. Still, I think this grave mistake in his otherwise flawless reputation gives Marcus an approachability for us today who study him. He's a bit like Hadrian in that regard. We can see these two men as the flawed individuals that they were, just like you and me. Even good emperors messed up sometimes. Yet, we can also see them making sincere efforts in their own unique ways to be the best leaders they could. There's a good-natured, virtuous side of Marcus that overshadows his flawed side, and that makes him, for me, very likable. So, to represent his coinage, I've picked a denarius from the middle of his reign, from around 172-173 AD. Here we can already see him with that long philosopher beard we all know him for. I also enjoyed the attention to detail on his hair. His hair was very curly, and it's properly represented here, as well as his very bulging eyes. I think it's one of the first things I noticed on him when I first saw one of his statues. That serene expression with his eyes almost like in this halfway open position, and it's very well replicated here on the coin. Apart from that, we have the legends with his regnal name. Marcus Antoninus Augustus, Tribunicia Potestate for the 26th year. That's a huge number, right? 26 years with powers of a tribune. That's because he held that office for a very long time while he was a Caesar under the previous emperor. So the number of titles just accumulated. On the reverse, we have the image of Equitas, the goddess of equality, good faith, fair dealings, and the fair rule of law to all citizens. She holds on one hand a cornucopia, the horn of abundance, and on the other a set of scales, reinforcing this idea of equality of Rome's citizens. This coin was made right at the middle of the Marcomannic Wars, so I find it very contrasting that we have a benign deity, such as Equitas, while at the same time the legends make a reference to the war. It starts with Imperator Sextum, showing Marcus was directly exercising command over the troops for the 6th year, It's once again that interesting contrast between that intellectually driven emperor, more inclined to his philosophy and a calm ruling of the empire, and the circumstances of war and strife that impose themselves upon him. And here it shows he was up to the task. For the 6th year, he was far from the comforts of his palace, taking the fight back to the enemies of Rome. However, he keeps reinforcing the importance of the civic values of Roman society, of civilized life, instead of just churning out endless streams of coins with military iconography. For me, fascinating really. It displays a lot of tact on the part of the mint officials to come up with such messages with two very contrasting meanings. And here we have it, a full set of the 5 good emperors. Now I want to hear from you. Which of the 5 good emperors is your favorite? Have you managed to collect them all already? Let us know in the comment section down below. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Leave a like and consider subscribing if you did. Happy collecting, and I'll see you soon. Let me give a special thank you to all of my amazing channel members and Patreons for their generous support. This channel would not be the same without your help. And if you would like to be part of this list, have early access to my videos when they are uploaded to YouTube, and a series of other perks, make sure to check out my Patreon page and my members tab on YouTube. Thank you very much.